right, there we go.
Today is Wednesday, April 1st, 2026. And if you're looking for a joke, just look out the window or look at the ballot. Down the road at Port Canaveral, NASA is finally sending the Artemis II crew toward the moon. It's the first time in over 50 years we're seeing sending humans into deep space, and they're doing it on April Fool's Day. You have to wonder if the astronauts are checking their oxygen tanks for confetti, or if the real joke is that we're heading to the lunar surface just as things on Earth are getting, well, planetary. Because while NASA is looking at the stars, our own streets in Orlando are looking at a different kind of fire. The No Kings protest hit a fever pitch right here at City Hall, and frankly, it's hard to tell where the activism ends and the theater begins. We saw the viral clips of the nursing home protest, a group of activists actually wheeling seniors out into the humidity to hold signs they couldn't read, screaming about tyranny while the poor folks just wanted their pudding. It's a cynical brand of performance art that's paralyzing our downtown traffic and achieving little more than a collective headache for everyone trying to get to work. But while the left is busy stage managing seniors for the cameras, the right is locked in a brutal identity-defining succession crisis over who gets to wear the crown next. For years, the Florida model was the gold standard of conservatism. But as we look toward 2028, the vacuum left by the MAGA patriarch in the White House has invited a new, more volatile element into the laboratory. On one side, you have Byron Donalds, the polished, Trump-endorsed heavyweight who represents establishment MAGA, competent, legislative, and loyal. He's the heir apparent, the man who thinks he can keep the machine running. On the other, you have James Fishback, the 31-year-old insurgent who isn't just running against Donalds, he's running against the very idea of the uniparty. Fishback is the first Groyper candidate to go mainstream, and he is doing it by weaponizing the grievances of a generation that feels the current GOP has sold them out. He's calling Donalds a slave to AIPAC and big donors. He's talking about goy slop and looksmaxxing to crowds of cheering University of Florida students who care more about the isolationism and cultural aesthetics than traditional policy papers. This isn't just a primary, it's a hostile takeover. Is the future of the GOP a disciplined continuation of the Trump era under Donalds? Or is it a radical isolationist and racially charged populism that breaks away from Trump himself? The rocket is on the pad, the protesters are shouting at nursing homes, and the GOP is at war with itself. Okay, let's bring in the panel. David Washington, thank you for joining us. David is CEO of Jane Washington. He is the behavioral architect. He decodes human behavior behind the ballot, leveraging a 35-year track record and a background in behavioral health. He applies the science of why we act to the art of how we vote. At Jane Washington, he combines efficiency with insight to ensure the best people with the best ideas lead. And we're joined by Kellen Clark, Operations Director. With his relentless drive for reform, Kellen views the intersection of law, media, and politics as a critical opportunity to improve how we govern. Driven by the mission to reconnect the public with their government, he translates passion into action by expanding public resources and sharpening outreach strategies for office holders. Okay, so thank you both for joining us. I would like to start off by asking David, so with Fishback, he is, some are arguing, using dehumanizing language, calling a sitting congressman a slave and Byron. Is this a behavioral slip up or a calculated strategy to trigger a fight or flight response in a base that feels historically ignored?
Hey, Sean. Hey, Kellen. Excuse me, gentlemen. I'm getting over a sinus infection. I will try to be very clear as possible. It's great to be back on the King Exchange. I think it's the latter, Sean. Fishback is quite the character. And in my estimation, he's doing everything on purpose. It's intentional. Yes, it's calculated, and it works for a segment of the populace. Wait, let me back that up. It works for a segment of the voting demographic that will likely vote for him. And these are individuals who are not the high propensity voters. These are typically young men who are on the peripheral of the voting demographic, and they are showing up. They're showing up at his events. There were hundreds strong at the downtown Orlando Taco Bell last night, I believe, where he held court, and you have to hand it to Fishback. He is a polarizing. Um, I don't want to say person. What's the word I'm looking for?
Nah,
Polarizing figure.
figure.
Figure or
Yeah,
caricature.
caricature. Yes, that's
Yeah.
even better, and it's done on purpose. And I follow a little bit of his campaign and some of the conversations he's had on X, on Reddit, and just in the media in general. And you know, he's got a nice crowd. It's not the crowd that's going to lead to him getting the nomination. However, I believe that he's setting up for another run at elected office, something maybe a little bit more local, where he can really tap into these young voters.
I agree. And Kellen, I would ask you, for a candidate who focuses on looks maxing, you may be more familiar with that. I find, and the various internet memes associated, especially with the segment of Groypers, who are they're they're not a part of MAGA. They have strong criticism of MAGA, and they have very specific ideals. And one of their main figures, at least online, is Nicholas Fuentes. However, with Fishback, he is, I would say, one of the first mainstream, Groyper adjacent candidates. And so while he may not win the nomination, Kellen, do you see that there is even a point to acknowledge the online sort of community, at least to galvanize a new base for the future?
I think that's by and large the idea of Fishbach's campaign. I think Fishbach wants to really lock down a very specific target because David's right. That target cannot deliver a victory. There's just no way. Like I think the predictor market had him like a 7% chance of winning. I give him a 0% chance as he is right now. But it's I think I at least I thought for a while, except he keeps poking at Byron for no reason. My thought process was that he's hoping to lock down a base and kind of do the third party play, which is where you lock down a certain base that another candidate, one who goes on to the general election, may need to win. So, for example, maybe if all you have is Gen Z men who are conservative, you can win the general, but maybe at the same time, you can't win the general without those same men. So the idea would be that, Fishbach would play ball with Donalds. Donalds would give something to Fishbach. Fishbach endorses Donalds when he loses. That was what I figured would be the case. However, he's not. If that is his play, he is not making it easy for himself. Because there's actually even more stuff he said about Donald, such as "Come on down the shooting range, Byron. Let's see if you're really black." Like that was something he said publicly on Twitter. Definitely makes it a much harder sell if that is his play. Now, it's also likely, given if you know anything about James Fishbach's previous history, that it's a grab for attention as well. I think that, David, you're mentioning that's like an intentional strategy. It could be a cry for attention because he does have a history and he's in debt because of this, of pretending to have jobs that he doesn't have. He pretends to be higher ups at organizations, particularly an investment firm that he was not a higher up in, and then also pretended to work with the Department of Governmental Efficiency under Elon Musk, which he didn't. And again, that one with the investment firm landed him severe debt. His car was repossessed, and he's been struggling ever since to pay it off because he can't even pay his own attorneys. So it could very well be a cry for attention and like a Hail Mary sort of deal, because it's very hard to hire somebody like that right now. It's very hard to hire somebody like that. So it could be just be a Hail Mary of, hey, either I get a government job, I win the nomination by some crazy long shot, or am able to become enough of a brand to where I can actually start making money off it, get a brand deal, get whatever it is that he needs to get off there. So as to what his exact plays, again, I think the most sensible route would be to do the third party play of capture one very specific demographic and then barter that with Donalds. But again, he's not making that easy for himself. So who knows?
And Kellen, I also would ask you psychologically, why is the Groyper aesthetic, which is often abrasive and exclusionary, but not necessarily that, finding a home in the Florida college Republicans? We see, especially within Gen Z men. Why do you think there's some connection there?
I think there's multiple different theories this way. I mean, of course, if somebody feels like they don't belong, they'll grab onto whatever will take them, right? So if that ends up being a like Groyper kind of community, it ends up being the Groyper kind of community. But it's also, I think, the outrage is a part of the appeal. I think there's there's that strong populist distrust of politicians, and we've seen this as well. This was a lesson we can learn from Donald Trump himself, right? Is many people mistake composure as fake and mistake outrageous statements as speaking the truth, right? That if you're not saying some out there take, then you're not really telling the truth, right? This idea that everybody deep down has some kind of wacky stance on something, right? And while James Fishback, he doesn't present that on every single angle of his policy, right? His economic policy is actually nothing crazy. Genuinely, it's pretty standard fare what you would see. But he comes out there specifically with the social stuff. And I think many people connect with him, not even always because they agree with him, but because they think only a person who's very, very genuine would dare even say half the nonsense that's said there. And so I think for that reason, many people end up coming to the conclusion that he is more genuine than some of the other candidates, such as Donalds or the lieutenant governor or Renner or anybody else.
I think you bring up a great point. And David, I would ask to that point, is this outrage of Donalds legit? I mean, is there any backing to it? Because we look at Donalds, and I would label him as like a safe MAGA sort of persona, right? Yeah. Maybe 10 years ago, MAGA was something that was so like outside of the box. Now I feel that the MAGA, since with Donald Trump being around, it's the safe way to play. So is this outrage actually, something that is unfiltered and true, or is there something that is much more calculated, as you said, but has no basis in reality whatsoever?
Well, let me start here. You stated in your intro that there is a split or something similar to that in the Republican Party, and I really don't see that. Particularly, I've heard in legacy media that there is a split in MAGA. Not really. When polled recently, I think CNN did this poll. I think it was like 92% to 100% of those who identify as MAGA support the president. And MAGA is now the Republican Party. They're the core. And if they're falling in line with Representative Donalds, then Donalds has the nomination. As a matter of fact, I'll just go out and say right now,
he's going to win.
Representative Byron Donalds will be the next governor of Florida. So the outrage, excuse me, gentlemen, is maybe performative at this time. It's good that there is some type of challenge. Excuse me. It's good there's a challenge to the presumptive nominee. You would think you'll see this with Collins or Renner, who are also running for the Republican nominee for governor. Uh, However, this is the primary season, and this is politics. Donalds has what in this last quarter alone raised $22 million, and now
Yep.
he's just short of $70 million total for this race. He's doing what's necessary to position himself as a nominee, and he's going to take some shots. He's going to take a few arrows. At the end of the day, and regardless of what you see in Tallahassee or in D.C. with the Republicans, at the end of the day, they fall in line,
They
and you
do.
can't really say that about the Democrats.
And I
we're
want to,
gonna, yeah,
can I add on a little bit, Sean?
of course.
And also, it's worth noting, Donald started very, very early. And I don't just mean like with his official filing date. We predicted him winning this race 3 years ago here at JW. 3 years ago. We did this publicly 3 years ago. Because, and we ended up seeing it, specifically, we're seeing it really show up with Renner's campaign, right? Paul Renner is on the face a very, very good candidate, one who would be very competitive, right? Former Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives, all the right conservative talking points, all the right experience, former military, all that good stuff. But he started so much later than Donalds and Collins. And as a result, he hasn't really scraped any odds at all of winning. And that's because a lot of people who would endorse him are not endorsing him because they endorsed Byron a year ago, like a whole year plus ago. And when you do that, right, he basically stole the momentum that Renner would have because Renner decided too late. And Byron, again, is people have been kind of steering out of Byron's way for years at this point because they knew that he was going to go for this from the very beginning. And I'd like to talk about that polling as well, David, right? Because
Kellen, can I add? I don't know if you're aware that speaking of endorsements, Representative Susan Placencia, who
Yeah.
we're watching for other reasons, withdrew her not support for Donalds and now is supporting Collins. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I remember her saying, remember hearing that she had supported Donalds, but would potentially consider other candidates if, other candidates at the time were running. And to touch on that polling a little bit, right? Within the base that still identifies with MAGA, yeah, they're pretty consistent. The question is that where it's really bad is, and I think part of the CNN poll is they want to show you just how aggressive the movement is. That's kind of the point. I think most news organizations, they'll categorize their polls in a certain way to make it look a certain way. But when you look at Republicans not identifying as MAGA specifically, that's where the Republican Party and the conservatives are taking a massive hit right now. That's where they're really struggling, not necessarily within strictly within the MAGA movement itself. It's everything adjacent that still votes for those politicians if need be. That's where the problems are. And I don't think a lot of the core issues are fully addressed with Fishback specifically. Because again, his economic stuff is very surface level and it's very much just general outrage. It doesn't actually, there's not much engine behind it, I'm afraid.
I think the main engine behind it would be something that is online. And who's online? Gen Z and younger people, and especially men. He's appealing to men, and the sort of grievances that they have, which I find legitimate. I'm not discrediting what they are voicing, but
Some real
it's
stuff.
like my main, I guess, criticism of this new right, far right, Groyper, whatever you want to label it. It's just I don't see how it's viable, like how it actually would sustain itself in the real world. If you're gonna talk about, I guess, deli top or countertop politics, it's like you just meet someone at the grocery store and you say, hey, what do you think about this? And if you ask them, what do you think about Donald's, I'm sure they'll have, if they have like at least two brain cells, they'll have something to say, whether it be positive or negative. They're aware of who he is.
Right.
But for something that's more, and not necessarily Fishback because he is gaining the traction, but I would say his ideals and sort of the looksmaxxing and goyslop and all those sort of terms that he really harnesses on. If you were to ask someone average, at the grocery store what they think about that, they look at you like you're an alien because that's not the language that they're used to.
They're too employed for this.
Yeah. And so I feel that, and David, if you have something to say, I just feel like there has to be, I think it's lending itself to the future, and maybe even within 5 years, we'll see a more mainstream
Yes.
discussion, but I just don't think it's the time now. However, I do think that Fishback is important because he is sort of paving the way for this in the mainstream.
Sean, you just hit the nail on the head there. I want to echo that as we see MAGA becoming the mainstream now, and honestly, a lot of what MAGA represents, many people in the middle, myself, identify with that. No, you know, excuse me, forever wars, strong immigration policy, America first. That was far right thinking, not too long ago during the Obama years, and now it's more mainstream. You're seeing independents, you're seeing like-minded Democrats move over to many of those type of policy points. And what you just said that maybe in 5 years, Fishback becomes more the norm, and some of these ideas that he espouses, addressing the needs of Gen Z young men who have been put on the back burner. Young men in general have been ostracized, they've been demonized, particularly young white men. And there's going to be pushback, and we're seeing the pushback now.
Kellen,
So,
you look like you disagree or have something to say.
I have a number of thoughts. I mean, yes, at the end of the day, perception is reality. If people feel oppressed, then to their mind they are, right. Like I would say, a lot of times it ends up being very dramatic. I think a lot of the things people describe about them, feeling oppressed, is a symptom of being young, not being a white man who's young, right. It's just something that happens with young people in general. um but here's kind of an interesting thought I've been having, right? Because the number one driver of our politics since the 90s has just been, we don't like the people in power, right? A lot of times, whenever an election goes by and some party flips the House or the presidency or whatever, the party takes it as some indicator that the people appreciate their policy, that their policy has won this great debate. And then they lose again 2 years later. So what happens every time, except for in 2002 because of 9/11, so there's been an exception there. But generally, I think where this Groyper thing comes from is where that thing that flips the house every 2 years comes from. It's just dissatisfaction with whoever's in power, no matter what they do or don't do. It is entirely irrelevant, right? When you actually look at what is proposed, first off, by the Groypers, first off, like if we're talking just Nick Fuentes, because he's kind of the main headliner, he flips like that all the time. He'll support two things that are directly opposing to each other. He does that often, right? It's kind of little more than just an outrage machine, right? It's, we're mad at things, so we're against things, right? We're mad at the way the state of the world is, therefore we oppose the government now. Now that is something that can win elections, like eventually, right? Maybe if people get really desperate enough, right? And the MAGA becomes that mainstream, yes, I could see it being a thing. But it is worth noting, I personally don't think it'll actually lead to any government solutions because it is too much focus on just being contrarian to what the standard is. There's too much of a focus on that. And maybe that's something that voters see through. Maybe voters end up seeing through. But I think that's kind of where the movement is at right now. It's just
I,
outrage.
I think bringing that angst to the forefront will allow the Republican Party to tap into that energy and give legitimacy to many of the policies that Trump and his current administration are trying to implement right now. For instance, excuse me, the push towards more funding and more attention on the trades, apprenticeships, things like that. Why go to college when you can make a hell of a lot more, in the trades? Being a data center electrician of some sort. Oh my God. You don't need a college degree for that, and you're going to make a hell of a lot more money sooner
Mhm.
rather than later.
Sure.
And these guys are looking at the cost of living. They're looking at the cost of housing. They're being looked at as and ostracized for being who they are. And so I think someone like Fishback tapping into that energy. It's just bringing the angst and the concern of this particular demographic that did win this past election for Trump,
True.
and giving them some legitimacy and hope for the future.
I,
For
you know,
now.
I want to
For
bring up the
now.
I want to bring up the point of, I guess the perception is for most people that Groypers are exclusionary, racially motivated, and everyone said the same thing about MAGA and Trump. And now, 10 years later, I would argue that MAGA, as being the current Republican Party, they're a pretty open tent. And you see lots of different types of people of all persuasions and backgrounds supporting Trump. And slowly but surely, I think the same is going to happen for the Groypers. And I would argue that, at least online, it already is gaining traction. And I do really want to get to the crux of what I would say is the overall driving force behind. And I would argue that there is a rift within the Republican parties. And that main point is Israel. And that is what is, and it's what is actually will unite people, especially when you look at Gen Z, largely against Israel, not only because of the war, but because of the funding for Israel. And so many candidates, including Donalds, receiving money from APAC. And so the connection there. And so Gen Z, a lot of them are levitating towards Donalds. I mean, not Donalds, rather, Fishback, because he calls out and he says, no, if we're truly America first, if we're truly about putting American intentions first, why are we sending billions to Israel? Why are we, bowing down to them in a way? And I think that right there, it really is that main split. And if the Republicans really want to gain back, MAGA wants to gain back those who left to join the whole Groyper movement, they would have to call out their, obvious ties with the state of Israel.
I I like to push back on those individuals who criticize our support for Israel, who overemphasize Israel's importance to American policy. Yes, they are our allies in a once hostile Middle East that's changing. Israel has played an outsized role. The government has played an outsized role in our policies in the past. Um, I think there should be some clarification of the misinformation. I know there should be. Um, it's not and I hope and pray it's not the Israeli people, the citizens of Israel, all of them, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, because you do have Christian
There's a
and Muslim
mix.
citizens in Israel who participate in government there. But perhaps the leadership of Netanyahu and the far right that should be criticized. I get that. I understand that, and I agree with that. However, the Nick Fuenteses and Tucker Carlson's, Candace Owens, they take it a little bit too far when they mischaracterize the role of Israel in what we do as a country and our policies. And I just think that that misinformation has to be addressed very clearly and succinctly so that we can move past that and get to a better world.
Mhm.
I would agree, Kellen.
Yeah, I wanna add on a little bit as well. I think I don't think it'll really matter if MAGA actually were to change course in Israel or any other issue, right? Where the Groyper movement gets its fuel from is, MAGA says they're going to do these things. They go to office, and then some of them they do, others they get rug pulled on, right? They are expecting to release the Epstein files. Next thing they know, they elected one of the chief people in it. Things like that happen. And that kind of rug pulling is going to get people to completely resist it. The only thing that will bring these Groypers back to MAGA will be Democrats, not Republicans. I think no effort by Republicans will bring them back unless those Groypers are so concerned or so fearful of a particular Democratic candidate that they will fold on their position and vote for them anyways. I think that's the only way you get them back. And that's probably a multiple cycle thing. I think where you saw it, at least on the Democratic side, because this is a cycle you see on both sides. It just kind of alternates who's where, right? A lot of people chose just not to vote in the 2024 election, right? Because they wanted to stick to their guns and they didn't want to vote for Harris. But now many of them are saying, looking back, they kind of ended up regretting that. And I think we'll see a more rock solid formation of people who don't like the right coming out over the next 4 years. We'll start seeing that more. And then eventually they'll go back to their principles and then they'll sink back down into the bottom and they'll fracture again. That's how this goes. And that's how it is for Republicans. It's probably going to be a case of right now it fractures. They'll stick to their guns. They're going to screw up an election or two. And then they're all going to form back in because they realize they don't like the Democrats again. And then the cycle will repeat itself. I think we've seen it now over the past 30 to 40 years, how these modern politics are going here in America with the electorate.
I think there's one big difference, and that's the guy in the White House. And tonight,
He's different, yeah.
Tonight he has a speech in front of America where he'll talk about, the Iran, excuse me, the war with Iran, and how this is winding down. The Epstein issue, I think, is a non-issue, except for those who suffer from, TDS. If Trump was really, really an issue in the Epstein files, Democrats would have said something publicly about it a long time ago. Our Congressman Maxwell Frost here at CD10 in Florida, he had an opportunity to look at the files. He posted on his social media asking his followers to ask him what he should be looking for or suggest what he should be looking for when he look at those files. Crickets. As a matter of fact, I think he's home somewhere, gallivanting. Maybe the film festival season is over, so he's not in Utah. But, I mean, if there was something damaging in regards to Trump, we would have heard about it a long time ago.
I think I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. I think before there was before there was a mutual strategy of there's people on both ends that are getting implicated in this. So if neither side pips, neither side loses. It's like a game theory thing. Neither side pips, neither side loses. One side pips, they get temporary advantage, and then they get screwed over long term. Right? That's how it goes. And then that was what the Trump campaign, I think, by and large went for. They said, hey, if we lean into this Epstein issue now, we will win this election. Long term, it's a problem, but long term, we're not running for re-election anyways. So who the hell cares? So I think that's the number one thing that deters Democrats. Not that there's nothing to it, just that before, and even then now, but especially before, right? There was too much at stake for them,
Right.
Now, but more so before.
I kind of take this forward. I really don't think Democrats want to screw around with the Epstein files and really follow this through. It is too big. It's horrible. What's going on.
It's too complicated as well. There's one thing we've seen is that it's like half the important people in the power and in business still end up getting implicated somehow. So then you have to dig through the weeds of, who's at fault and who isn't. Systemically speaking, who's at fault. It's a whole mess. And then and then if you actually did, but we'll circle back to what we were talking about here in Florida. Sorry about that, Sean.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, a final question. For this segment, and some context, Nick Fuentes, espoused on one of his live stream shows that he is voting for the Democrats going forward, and he encourages his own supporters and followers to vote for the Democrats as well, because he feels that the current GOP MAGA establishment is not delivering on their promises of America first and the interests of the American people. And with Fishback, he is, I would say, comes in the way between that is, hey, I am a Republican, but I'm not a Republican. I am going to be actually promoting American ideals, especially when you look at his policies. He really argues for, I guess, this conservative image traditionally, but there's also this new sort of like populism, especially for Gen Z. And my question is, so if the GOP message is broken for Gen Z, does this reform need to come from the top down, which would be Donald's, or the edges, which would be in Fishback, David?
Um, First, Fuentes. Fuentes has a platform. He's a young man. He's out there making money, and for him to encourage his following to vote for Democrat only lines his pockets, because then he'll have a devil that he can argue against and say how bad they are. We need to go back to, you know, electing Republicans. So for him, again, for
Exactly
folks
what I was
like
gonna say.
him and Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, I am a fan of Candace. They have to put food on the table also.
Yeah.
As far as Fishback, Fishback is a legitimate candidate, a flawed one. I'm glad that he is tapping into that young base of voters who are on the peripheral for all purposes, particularly in a primary election. Will they make a difference in this particular primary election? No, they
Yeah.
won't. As far as Donald, Governor elect Donalds has to maintain that MAGA message and be consistent. Kitchen table issues, less taxes, more money in our pockets. And as many of these policies that go through the federal government, get past the courts, and then are eventually supported by a decision by the Supreme Court, it will benefit Americans now, Americans later, Americans into the future. And the message has to be consistent. If I was managing Donald's, I would definitely lean into that prosperity that the president has been talking about since day one of the 2024 campaign. Excuse me. Let's usher in this next golden age.
And Kellen, you want to respond? For Fishback, would you see? And I would say that you would definitely argue that there needs to be reform within MAGA and the GOP.
Sure.
If you were to choose a candidate, not that you would endorse either Donald's or Fishback,
Mm.
but which one do you think would be more successful in actually advocating for a new reform? And since Donald's is already closely aligned with MAGA, would you argue that Fishback, though you may, definitely disagree with his policies
Mhm.
and the way, of his language, would you say that he would have a better chance of actually, you know, pushing for a reform if need be?
No, I don't think either candidate would be particularly great, but I would actually give that edge to Donald still. The thing about Fishbach is he has very weak governmental connections, and he's relatively new to all this, right? He's more of a messenger and Wall Street boy by trade. That's who he is, right? To create a big reform, you have to have a big strategy. Right now, his strategy is very much just focused on this messaging. If he were to get elected, I think it would be just like Trump in 2017, right? Gets in, shit, now what? you know, and it would struggle to get off the ground. So I actually still think if you wanted to get stuff actually done, Donald's is still your better bet right now.
Okay. And I would say, using these terms like goy slop, and certain like but really
Too
like the
important for
language of
this.
Gen Z, and I had to like, become accustomed to it and like really like understand legitimately what that actually means. And so to an older voter, it's seen as gibberish. And for me, it's seen as, sort of silly as well. But for Gen Z, especially those Gen Z who are, I would say, chronically online, me being one of them, and so many of us just online constantly, where this
Mm.
language sort of just feeds into the cultural discourse on those apps. This language is seen as a tribal signal, right?
A
And for
little bit,
many
yeah.
on the left, they have their own sort of language. This right has their own language as well. And
Yep.
so I would say, how deep does this sort of like new right subculture actually go among the voters that you guys track. We saw a standing ovation for Fishback at University of Florida, I believe, when he was criticizing, he attacked APAC, and there was an uproar, a large applause in what he was criticizing. And so I would say that, especially again amongst the youth, they are the future of our nation. Is this language actually something that is persistent, or is it just something that we have to just deal with for now and then ignore, and then it'll be something of the past in a couple of years?
It's the language of a generation at this point, and every generation has its icons, its language, its culture, and so why not for this particular demographic, demographic, and for a Fishback or any candidate who wants to tap into that demographic, as Trump demonstrated in Trump 1.0 and in Trump 2.0 or 3.0, depending on if this is his third term, but that's a different story. Um, but he was able to tap into where the young people were or are at that time. Ads on the video games, the online video games, on certain social media where they're at. So yeah, this is generational. This is their language. This is their culture. And a candidate who is looking to win, they win on the peripheral. They win with those mid to low propensity voters, and they defeat their opponents who use the same playbook over and over and over.
Um, and Kellen, I would say, and you can answer to that as well, but I just want to add, when you look at, I guess, the cultural zeitgeist, do you feel that that truly informs voters? I would argue that with the Harris campaign, their sort of campaign was a lot about the aesthetics. We got the water, the coconut trees. We got the twerking rappers, and that appealed. It did, to the
It did.
Gen Z. We saw so many memes of coconuts and parodies and remixes of "I Fell Out of a Coconut Tree," and it's like, and it really resonated with voters, especially Gen Z. Emotionally, they found her relatable. They found her funny. They found her as Mama Kamala, and it's like, but it ultimately didn't happen for her. She didn't
Right.
win with that. And with
Right.
Fishback, although he's not doing coconuts, he is appealing to the
Where she
same
has
sort of
coconuts, where Biden had dark brand and he has voice slop. I think I see
right.
what you're saying, and I'll say, like, I'll start by mostly agreeing with David. Catering to Gen Z, like speaking their language, that ain't going anywhere, right? It's go Of course, any particular set of language will be different every campaign if they are successfully messaging in Gen Z, because we seem to change the way we talk several times a
Oh
year,
my God,
right?
yes.
So I think by the end of this campaign cycle, I think people will be done with the word goy-slop, for example, right? They'll be done. They'll be done. But the underlying strategy is still there. And I think you had something important when you discussed like campaigns like Biden and Harris, because while it can help you win a race, it alone is not sufficient, right? It's necessary because you want that crowd, you want that particular block of voters, which is going to start voting more and more the more they are out and about in the real world, the more of them are actually registered and all that good stuff. Um, but on its own, it's not sufficient. So your strategy will always have to be bigger than that. There's always going to be another layer to it, but it is going to be an important piece of the puzzle going forward. I don't think, like, for example, I think at this particular election, because again, we don't Gen Z still is not voting as much as they should. Like if Byron didn't speak their language very hard this campaign, he would still be fine by and large, because the Gen Z aren't enough to actually control the vote and meaningfully shift it. I don't think, at least not in a way that would favor Jerry Demings or anybody like him.
Okay.
Did I miss something with Kamala Harris? Because I just found her campaign, from my perspective, personally and professionally, just disconnected. I totally didn't understand the coconut crap.
No.
She wasn't relatable.
You wouldn't get it.
Yeah.
It was
We wouldn't get
relatable for Gen Z though, for whatever
right.
reason. And I would say to
Right.
the, to the average voter, no, this is like bonkers. This is like as I said with the Fishback stuff, looksmacking and the language he uses, it's bonkers. But for Gen Z, they truly emotionally relate to this stuff. They're very emotional about it. And for Kamala, they called her Mamala, and they saw her as the first female Black president. Like, this is something that we need
and David,
and relate to. And her language was humorous, and it appealed to the memes online and sort of the culture of Donald Trump is a bully and Mamala is just all about the coconuts.
And David, I can let you in on what the appeal of Coconut Tree is. So it was from an interview where she was basically paraphrasing something her grandmother said to her. He's like, "You kids all think you fell out of coconut tree," and then she was just reminiscing, and she chuckled. And in a way, I don't think this was actually the intention of the campaign at first, but they smartly adopted it. It was basically, you say a statement that on its own means nothing, and you get a little chuckle out of it. That's kind of a cornerstone of Gen Z humor, which is finding humor in something that is not on its face humorous. It's very ironic at its core, and that was what the appeal of the coconut tree thing ultimately was. So I don't think most Gen Z would tell you that. Most Gen Z people be like,
no, we used that term back when I was a kid. So it wasn't like, I mean,
again, it wasn't about the term.
Me,
it wasn't about the term. It was about her reaction to the term. That was what was actually funny.
I just found that her campaign focused on the female demographic so hard that there was a disconnect with everyone else, and she was off the radar for 45 days after being coronated nominee. 45 days, and so the Trump campaign just dominated with what Donald does best. And so I found his shenanigans at McDonald's, engaging the shenanigans on the garbage truck, and that's the kind of stuff that seemed organic, even though it was staged to some point or scheduled to some point. But it was typical Donald. And with Kamala, it's just that it was a narrow-minded campaign for a narrow demographic.
Exactly.
And it just turned me off.
And again, and I think there's something to that, right? It turned you off, right? Some people, it was exactly what they're looking for, but you're right. On its own, that strategy wasn't sufficient that they're putting in, because they needed a bigger strategy than that. They were on to a decent start, but again, you're right. They didn't finish their strategy. So there wasn't really that much of a chance because they didn't complete their strategy.
And I think that sort of like wraps up the point of what I'm trying to say of, if it appeals to this narrow sort of demographic, this narrow target, and that language has an emotional resonation with them, even though it sounds so silly. It's something that they find humor in because, as you mentioned, Kellen, it's ironic, and there is some truth to something behind it, right? I mean, with Donald, right? His plan to cut, the school property taxes, right? Would that feel real to a 22-year-old, right? Or does Fishback's, rhetoric and his language ultimately win the day with the voters? And you have to think about it. And it's like Gen Z, I would not trust them with the future. Personally, it's scary to think about.
We'll get there one day.
But it's like, you hope that, they learn and that everybody learns. But ultimately, I feel that as we progress in this social media age that now is, AI, the revolution there, it's only going to become more aesthetics and more of how you talk. And politics has always been that, right? But it's going to be more about, can you know the super specific online rhetoric and language? Because quite frankly, older people, and I mean those in the nursing homes going towards No Kings, are unfortunately dying. They're not going to be here in 10, 15 years. And it's just it's how life is. But
they're the ones who vote.
They are the ones who vote. But
so anybody in Gen Z who votes will have a bigger slice of the pie, so to speak, because the pie is smaller.
I know in 2020, someone who died 13 years ago was able to vote. But when, moving forward, that's not going to be the case anymore. So would it be, and I guess my final question is like, do we have to, and to both of you, do we discredit Fishback and say, do you, or, and I know, we've been talking about this, but if you were to have to say, last question, one criticism and one something you think that each candidate is doing right, and we
That's
can
fine.
finish on that.
Yeah, I like
Okay.
that. Do you want to
Um,
cover all of the candidates or just Donalds and Fishback?
We can, well, today I would like to really focus on the GOP and the future of them, because I highlighted
Sure.
Donalds and Fishback
Okay.
because I would say they're the main two contenders right now, even though Donalds has his lead. But I would say we're going to focus on them today.
Yeah, that sounds good. Go on,
um,
David.
I don't think we could discredit anyone until qualifying for the position of governor is over, and that is in mid-April. Until then, everyone's legitimate until they either write the check or have the necessary petition signatures of active voters to qualify. So Fishback, until qualifying is over, he's legitimate, and I, I will not discredit him till I will not say anything discrediting until after qualifying is over. Then I'm going to rip everyone apart who doesn't qualify, and hope and pray that they don't
Good
run again.
man. Good
That's
man. I
that.
respect
That's
that.
how I am. It's like, don't waste people's time. Don't get people's hopes up high. I don't see a path to Fishback winning the nomination. However, I do support anyone who is qualified and does qualify to run for any elected office. Um, they use that platform and they give citizens reasons to vote for them and fire the incumbent if that's the case.
Yeah, I'll take a similar stance to David. Well, if I was the person with buttons in my room and I could choose who comes through and who gets discredited, sure, I'd have some red buttons for Fishbach, but it's not my choice. I think David's right. You will see, depending on how well he does during the primary. Again, he's not going to win, but we can see how much he, how far he actually did come. If I were to say something that Fishbach does right, him focusing on a communal aspect to his campaign is smart. That is one little nugget of wisdom in there. I will say there is a smart thing in that. In a world where people feel more isolated, try to make a campaign that feels more personalized is definitely a smart play. Definitely a smart play. Again, his strategy is incomplete, but for that little bit that he did flesh out, I do kind of get the rationale behind the campaigning strategy. Something he could do better, complete his strategy, and he's only targeting on single little nick of voters. You can't really flip that, and unless he was planning to like play ball with Donalds, but he took it too personal with Donalds too
Yeah,
quickly to
yeah,
actually flip it in that, because it's one thing to criticize policies, another thing to go for the personal
yeah.
first.
Yeah,
That's
he's
kind of
done.
wild. Yeah, that was very foolish of him. But
He may
young
be
man,
setting up for another campaign, more
that's
local.
true. That's true. He could run. If that is the case, that makes a lot more sense. Although
Correct.
don't know what positions there are in Madison County where he's from. That's one of the
Commissioner.
least. All like two of them, I think. I don't know how many people are in Madison County, but it is not very many. We have individual neighborhoods here in Orange County with more population than all of Madison County, but that's besides the point. As far as Donald's, what he does right is that he started early and he started early. He made his intention early, and he marched through with the intention of winning from years and years ago. But that's the smart way to do it, right? I think these days, given how everything's online and information flows over a longer period of time, we're going to keep seeing this trend of eventually. I think eventually we're going to get to a point where you have to like start planning like 8 years ahead. We're going to get to that point eventually. Donald's being 3 to 4 years ahead is still very good for him though. That's what's bringing him out on top, and I can tremendously respect that. As far as things doing wrong, I guess being a little bit more specific where it's tactical. Again, if your victory is like a foregone conclusion, sometimes it's best to just not alienate people. But I think there are some instances where he could provide a bit more into the direction of Florida than saying it's like DeSantis kind of. You know, it's a little weak, but again, foregone conclusion. I do understand why that's his mindset.
Where's Madison County? I've never heard of it.
It is so it is not it is on North Florida, bordering Georgia, 2 doors down from the Leon County, which are Tallahassee. So you have Leon
Okay.
County, Jefferson, Madison, and then Madison. It's basically straight lined with the West Coast on the Georgia border.
Interesting. Maybe he will run
Uh,
out there. I don't know.
yeah, I was up there last week because I was going to Tallahassee. It's just a forest. It's just a forest. But that's where he
Interesting.
lives. He's one of the few people that lives there.
Interesting. So I would say as we wrap, we have talked about a lot today, and I guess the identity of the GOP moving forward. I would argue that the GOP is outgrowing its founder, or MAGA is outgrowing his founder, and that of Donald Trump, and he will be out in a few years, and who will replace him? And we see JD possibly. We see, I would say, two sort of forces, and I would like to pin to Donalds and Fishback as an example of those two forces that I would argue are what the establishment MAGA is, and which would be Donalds, and this new criticism of both MAGA, but both the Democrats, but also MAGA and their grievances there, and that would be in Fishback. So I would say, we have to see where this leads us. I think that, Donalds will win, and I think, but a lot of the points that both of you raised, especially about Fishback, will be true, and he is, I would say, again, paving the way for a future party. Kellen, it's possible, and I could definitely see it where, they will have to pivot in a few years, and they, vote into, and they'll have to change ways. They vote in a Democrat, and then it's going to have to do, back to the start, and it's just the constant cycle. It's just whether or not we're in this totally new age of AI and of everything going on with the world, with just everywhere, that it's Gen Z, then, this new voter base going to really pivot things. So, I mean, next time I would love to focus on the other side of the aisle, while the Republicans, are at each other's throats over, the purity of the party, the Democrats are smelling blood in the water. So please join us for part 2 of this discussion, the blue blueprints, defining the resistance without a target.
That's fun.
And as always, please check out T8020. And thank you both, gentlemen, David and Kellen, for joining me here today. It was a very productive discussion, very insightful. And I think we'll just have to see. So
we got to do this weekly, Sean. This was really good.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.